Masechet Sanhedrin, Daf Samechet. We plan to complete the 7th perek and begin the 8th perek. So we read Amar Rabbi Akiva. This is a quote from the Mishnah. Let's go back a second and remember the Mishnah that talks about Hamchashef, someone who does witchcraft is liable to stoning. And the Mishnah points out it's only someone who actually does witchcraft and not someone who just makes an optical illusion that looks like he's doing some kind of real magic, but it's not, it's just sleight of hand. Then that person is not liable to capital punishment. And Rabbi Akiva learned from Rabbi Yoshua, this is the key, that he says here that he learned from Rabbi Yoshua the following difference. You have two people that are gathering cucumbers, and one does it but is not liable, one does it and is liable, and both of you using some kind of magic. What's the difference? If they're actually doing sorcery and the cucumbers actually are being disconnected from the ground and gathering into a pile, meaning like really, it's really happening through some supernatural force, then he would be liable to stoning. However, if he's just using sleight of hand, but he's not actually, it's not real magic, then he is not liable to capital punishment. All right, now our Gemara picks up. Now, is it true that Rabbi Akiva learned this from Rabbi Yoshua? We're going to see from the following long baraita and long but fascinating story that actually Rabbi Akiva learned this from Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, as we learn. V'atanya, k'shechala Rabbi Eliezer nichnasu Rabbi Akiva v'chaberav lebakero, hu yoshev b'kinov shelo v'hen yoshvin b'traklin shelo. When Rabbi Eliezer was sick on his deathbed, Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues went to visit him. And Rabbi Eliezer, was sitting in a canopy bed in a different room, in a bedroom, and they were sitting in the receiving room, in the parlor, called a traklin or triclinium in Greek, and that's because tri means three and recline is to lie down, so it would have three or so couches for the people, for guests to come and sit on and lie on. So they were in a different room. Now, why were they in a different room? If we remember back in Baba Mitzia, we learned the Avin Avachnai story where Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus was the one that went against the majority. He said that the oven is tahor, and everybody else said it was tameh. And in the end, they put him in excommunication, and they did not visit him this whole time, as we will see. But now that he was on his deathbed, they came to visit him. Now it was Friday afternoon, and Hyrcanus, remember this is Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, so Rabbi Eliezer calls his son the same name as his father, just like we do. And he came in to take off Rabbi Eliezer's tefillin, because he would generally wear tefillin all day long during the week. But on Shabbat, you must take it off because you're not supposed to wear tefillin on Shabbat. However, Rabbi Eliezer got angry at his son and pushed him out of here. He says, "Get out of here! Don't come in here and take off my tefillin." And so the son Hyrcanus went to the sages that were in the living room, and they said, "I think that my father has lost his mind. He's old and he has some kind of dementia, and he doesn't know what's going on, because if he did, he would know that it's Friday, Shabbat is coming, and you're supposed to take off your tefillin, and I'm helping him out, and he just doesn't know what's going on." However, Rabbi Eliezer overheard his son saying that, and he was very sharp as a whistle, and he heard it, and he said, "No, it's not me that's losing my mind, it's his mind," meaning my son Hyrcanus, and the mind of his mother. That's his wife, right? They're the ones that are going crazy, because you know what they're doing is only a few minutes before Shabbat, and they are leaving, meaning not caring about a serious prohibition that can lead to sikila, and instead they're dealing with something that will only lead to a sur shivut. What do you mean by that? he meant that his wife and his son had not yet lit the candles for Shabbat and heated up the food. And now sunset is coming very soon. And so what if they don't do it right now before sunset? Then they're going to end up violating Shabbat and lighting candles on Shabbat, Isur Sikila, or heating up food on Shabbat. So they're dealing with, instead of dealing with that, which they should be doing, they're dealing with Isur Shevut. If you wear tefillin on Shabbat, even if you would go outside and walk around with them, it still would not be carrying because you're still wearing them. So you're not supposed to wear tefillin on Shabbat, but if you do, it's only a minor prohibition, shevut, d'Rabbanan, not that important. And so you should be prioritizing, instead of coming over here in my room and taking off my tefillin, go and make the food and light Shabbat candles. Okay, so you see that he knew exactly what was going on. So it seems that they were outside because they didn't know how well he was, and maybe he wasn't visitable. But then they saw that he was totally sharp. He knew what was going on. His mind was stable. So they went into the bedroom, but even there, they didn't come close to him. They stayed four amot away, because he was still in excommunication, and you're not allowed to be close to someone in excommunication, so they stay 4 amot away. Amar lehem lama batem, Rabbi Eliezer says, oh, why'd you come? Amru lo lemod Torah banu. Oh, we came to learn Torah from you. Amar lehem ad achshav lama lo batem. Oh, if you wanted to learn Torah, why didn't you come all these years? Who knows how long this was going on? Amru lo hayalo penai. And they said, oh, we didn't have time. They tried to make an excuse, a sorry excuse, instead of coming to learn Torah with who was the greatest, one of, maybe the greatest sage of the generation. Amar lehen tamea ani im yamutu mitat asman. And Rabbi Eliezer says, I would be surprised if they died a natural death. That's Rabbi Akiva and all his colleagues here, right? Says they're gonna die as punishment for not coming to visit me and to learn Torah from me beforehand. Very strong words. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva shelimahu. Rabbi Akiva says, how about me? Right? Because I was. We'll see. He did come to learn once with them. Amar lo shelacha kashem mishalahen. Rabbi says your death is going to be worse than theirs because you had potential and you did come to me and you knew the value of coming and studying with me better than any of the colleagues, and you could really have learned all of my Torah. And so the fact that you didn't come more is even more liable than the rest of them. And in fact, we know that Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues did not die a natural death, but were tortured and killed by the Romans during the Bar Kokhba revolt. Natal shete zero'otav inichan alibo amad oy lachem shete zero'otai shehen kishte sifre Torah sheniglalin. This is one of the most saddest and most tragic statements that anyone has ever said. He picks up his 2 arms and he puts them onto his heart, and he says, "Woe to you, my 2 arms! They are like 2 sifre Torah that are rolled up." Imagine his arms are like the poles that the Sefer Torah is wrapped around, and his skin is like the clef of the Sefer Torah that's wound around, and all the Torah is inside, facing in. Harbe Torah lamadati v'harbe Torah limadati. I learned much Torah and I taught much Torah. In a sense, his body, he was so enmeshed in Torah, his own body became like a Sefer Torah itself, embodied Sefer Torah. Harbe Torah lamadati v'lo chisati merabotai afilu kecheleb hamlakek min hayam. Although I did learn a lot of Torah from my teachers, but I only took away from them as much as water as a dog that licks from the sea. You have the sea, it's tons of water, and a dog comes and laps up a little bit of water from the sea. That's how much Torah I learned compared to what my teachers knew and what they had to teach. And yet, even my Torah, I taught a lot of Torah. However, my students only took from me as much as a paintbrush from a tube of paint. If you take a brush of mascara and you put it into the makeup and you take it out, there's just a little dab on the brush, but most of it stays inside the tube. And that's an example of how much Torah he knows, although it's very little compared to what his teachers knew. But at least he had that much, and his students did not come and did not learn. And so all this Torah is being lost. There's a theme here, and there's other stories as well of the tragedy of the loss of Torah over generations. And you think of how much we have, all this, the whole Talmud, Yerushalmi, Bavli, Midrashim, Tosefta, Mishnah, and how much this seems like a lot. But all this that we have, right, we wonder how much we don't have. Not only that, but I learned 300 laws just regarding a particular type of sarat, the snow white leprous mark. I learned 300 halachot about this. That means memorizing 300 halachot and their understanding and the depth of them. How many hours and hours did he spend remembering and learning all of these details of the law? And no one ever asked about one of them. All right, well, how tragic to have to learn all that. I mean, it's good that he learned all that, but that nobody cares. And also, I'm able to teach 300 halachot, and some say 3,000 halachot, regarding planting of cucumbers with sorcery. So he had knowledge of all this sorcery and the laws about sorcery. No one asked me about them ever, except for Akiva ben Yosef, except for Rabbi Akiva. You see, that's why Rabbi Akiva's punishment is going to be worse, because he did come and learn once from me, so he knew that I had knowledge of all these things, and yet he didn't come back and didn't learn the rest of it. One time, he and I were walking on the way, and Rabbi Akiva said, "Rabbi, please teach me the laws of planting cucumbers." And I said one word, and the whole field was full of cucumbers. Rabbi Eliezer knew how to do what the magic word was to do this type of sorcery. Amar li Rabbi limadetani nitiatan lamedeni akiratan. And so then Rabbi Akiva said, "Rabbi, now you taught me how to plant them. Teach me how to uproot them and how to gather them together with sorcery." Amarti davar echad nitkabesu kulan lemakom echad. And Rabbi Eliezer said one word, and suddenly they all were uprooted and gathered into a nice pile. How could Rabbi Eliezer do sorcery? Didn't we just learn that it's not allowed? We'll see about that in the end. Amru lo hakadur v'ha'imus v'kameya usrora margaliot u'mishkol et ketana mahu. So the rabbis who were coming to visit and sitting there, they said they must have felt very guilty, and they said, "Okay, let's learn of some halachot now." So they said, "Rabbi, please teach us regarding these laws of Tumah and Tahara. If you have a ball, so a ball is made out like a baseball or a football. It's made out of leather on the outside, stuffed with some clothing and stuff on the inside, and sewn up. This and the following things all have in common is that they're made out of leather that are stuffed leather around something that's closed up. Now here's the law of Tum'ah. If you have just plain leather, just a piece of leather that has no use, is not made into a vessel, then it's not mekabel Tum'ah. Even if something tameh touches it, it's not susceptible to tum'ah. Unless you fashion it into a utensil, like you make a bag out of it. If you have a leather bag, then that is mekabel tum'ah. So that's the clear distinction. However, these things are not clear. What is this? If you take some stuffing and you put it into leather and close it up all the way, it's not a receptacle because it can't hold anything. You can't put anything in or out. But it is holding something inside. So do we say this is a utensil? It's a ball. Or do we say it's not a utensil because you can't put anything inside of it because it's all sealed up? So that's question one. Or imus is a last. That's what is used to make shoes. This would be a form that would be made itself out of some leather with stuffing in it, and you put it on a stick or something, and then you build a shoe around it. So if it's a form of a shoe, but also it is, nowadays we make it out of wood. but it is also something that's closed up. V'hakamiya, or an amulet, which is you take some writing and you put it in a pouch and you seal it up. Usrod hamargaliyot, or you take a pearl and you put it in a little pouch and wrap it up, and they would hang that on animals or things for good luck. Mishkolet ketana, small weights. A weight, it was made out of metal, and you want it to be an exactly whatever, 1 ounce, and they would wrap it in leather so that it wouldn't rub off, and then it would deteriorate and would weigh less. So all these things are things that are wrapped in leather, but the leather is closed up, so it's not a pocket. It's not a bag, so it doesn't have a receptacle. What do we say about these things? Mahu amar lehen hen timein v'tahoratan b'mashen. Rabbi Eliezer answered, they are susceptible to tum'ah. We look at the whole thing as a utensil. Whatever it is, now it's a ball. Now it's a weight. And so therefore it does receive impurity. And not only that, if it does become tameh, then how can you kosher it? You have to put it in a mikveh. So you don't have to take it apart so that the water can get in all sides, on the inside, on the outside. You have to take out the stuffing and undo the stitches. No, you don't have to do that, which you would if you considered it just separate pieces that happen to be near each other. Rather, you can take the whole thing as is and dunk the whole thing in a mikveh, because it becomes a single entity. So that makes sense. If it's a new entity as a utensil, it therefore becomes tameh, so too you can make it tahor just by dipping the whole thing. And now they asked another question. What if you have a shoe that you're making, you're forming a shoe, but it's still on the last? After you take it off, that means it's finished, that's for sure. But what if it's still on the last, still on the form, but you completed all the steps that you have to do? Is that called completion while it's still on, or do you have to also take it off for it to be a completed utensil so that it can receive tum'ah? Amar lehen hu tahor. So Rabbi Eliezer says, as long as it's still on the form, it is tahor. It's not a completed vessel yet. V'yaseh nishmato betahora. And that was the last word he said. The last word he said happened to be tahor, and that's a self-reference to Rabbi Eliezer himself, that before, back in the story of the oven of Achnai, not only did they say his ovens are tameh, they said he is tameh. They said, that's it, you are ostracized, you are out. But now that he said tahor, so now we see, right, the last word on his mouth was tahor, so that was a signal that the ostracism was over. Amad Rabbi Yoshua al Raglav, Amad, hutad haneder. Rabbi Yoshua got up on his feet. Remember, he's the one that also got up on his feet in that story and said, Lo b'shamayim hi. But here he gets up on his feet and says that the ban is gone, right? The vow that they made that they won't have anything to do with him, the excommunication is undone. And that's it. His death is a kapara for him. And so this is a resolution to that original story. Lemoseh Shabbat pagabo Rabbi Akiba min kesari lelod. Now, he died soon at that point. So sometime near Shabbat he died, or on Shabbat. And so Motzei Shabbat, that's when his funeral is going to be. And Rabbi Akiba was not there for Shabbat. And so he was on the road, and he saw the funeral procession as it was going from Caesarea to Lod. And he saw the funeral procession, and he joined in. And he was so anguished that he was banging on his flesh until he started, his blood went down onto the earth. Avi avi recheb Yisrael ufarashav harbe maot yeshli ve'en li shulchani lehar sotan. And Rabbi Akiba then eulogized him in front of the row. They had the row of mourners, and then everybody would come and give them words of consolation and say eulogies. And Rabbi Akiva's eulogy was to Rabbi Eliezer, my father, the chariot of Israel and its horsemen. He's quoting from what Elisha said to his teacher, Eliyahu, when Eliyahu went up in the chariots. And there also he called him my father, meaning he was so close, he was my mentor, he was the savior of Israel, and we lost him. I have many coins, but I have no money changer to give them to use them. In other words, I have many teachers teachings, I have many questions, but I have no one to ask them to, because before I could have asked Rabbi Eliezer, and he would have knew all of them. Now I just have bits and pieces of traditions, and no one will be able to explain them to me. So they're valuable, but now they're going to be worthless, like a valuable coin, but from a different country, and there's no money changer to change it into anything else that other people would understand their value. And so he feels just the great loss, the loss of Torah from losing this great sage. Alma Rabbi Eliezer Gemara. That's the end of the Braita, and we brought all that. Besides the fact that it's an amazing story, we brought all that to ask the question. So you see here, for that he learned the laws of cucumber sorcery from Rabbi Eliezer, but our Mishnah says he learned it from Rabbi Yoshua. So which one was it? And the answer is Gemaraha Rabbi Eliezer velo sevaraha hadar Gemaraha Rabbi Yoshua v'asberani haleh. It's both. And first he learned it from Rabbi Eliezer, but Rabbi Akiva did not understand it. Right? He learned it, but he didn't get it 100%. And then he learned it from Rabbi Yoshua, and Rabbi Yoshua explained it to him further, and then he understood it. That's why in the Mishnah it quotes Rabbi Akiva, says he learned it from Rabbi Yoshua, because that's when he really understood it. But it's true, he got a first lesson in it from Rabbi Eliezer. And now we ask, how could Rabbi Eliezer do sorcery? Someone who does an act of sorcery is liable to capital punishment. And this wasn't just a sleight of hand, he was really doing it. And the answer is, to learn is different. You have to learn about it. You have to know what it is. So in order to learn about it, it's permitted. Pasuk says, do not learn to do like the bad things that the other nations do. And it goes on, it says diviners, soothsayers, enchanters, sorcerers, and so on. So don't learn about it to perform it. So you're not allowed to perform it, meaning that you actually want the outcome because you want to use it for whatever, some personal gain. But to learn about it in order to understand and teach about it, that's permitted. And sometimes you have to even practice a little, not that they're going to go and sell the cucumbers or use it regularly, but just to learn about it. Why do they need to learn about it? Well, first of all, it's in the Torah. The Torah says, don't do these things, so you have to know what does the prohibition apply to. So you have to know what those things are. And furthermore, any of these sages could have been a judge on the Sanhedrin. And if a case came before them and someone is accused of being a sorcerer, magician, or something like this, then they have to know what it is. What did he do? What did you see? And they have to be able to distinguish and know whether he's innocent or guilty. So they have to know about the subject in order to understand the Torah and to adjudicate it properly. Hadran alach arba mitot. That brings us to the 8th perek, and we begin a new Mishnah, but this Mishnah continues the list of people who deserve capital punishment by sikila, by stoning. And the next reference is ben sorer umoreh, a stubborn and rebellious son. This is a child, we'll see how old exactly he is, who steals from his parents and buys meat and wine and eats it with low lives, and then they warn him and he goes and does it again, and all kinds of other restrictions. So this really does not ever happen. But we'll see what it's all about. So we ask, from what age can one be killed as a ben sorer umoreh? So since the pasuk says ben, so it is a young person, but how young? Well, if he's very young, then it does not apply to that person at all. So it starts off when he sees 2 hairs at the beginning of puberty, and he can only get the capital punishment from that point until he sees more hairs, until his beard rounds out. And we're talking about the lower beard on his privates, and not the upper beard on his face. But the rabbis always like to speak in a nice way, in euphemistic terms, to speak in a clean way and not refer to private parts in too graphic of a manner. So that's why they use euphemisms of upper and lower. Shene'emar ki yeh leish ben velo bat, ben velo ish katan patur shelo ba bichlal misvot. And we know that this is the age, so it's really a short window of maybe just a few weeks or a few months, because the pasuk says as if a man has a son. So from the word son, we learn that this only applies to a son and not a daughter. If a daughter steals and eats meat and wine and does all the same things, a daughter is not killed. And the word ben also excludes an adult. Ben, son, child, means and not an adult. Now, if he's very little, meaning under less than whatever that age is, let's call it 13, when he sees the two hairs, then he is he's totally exempt because he has not become liable to mitzvot. He's not responsible for mitzvot when he's under 13. But he still has to be a ben, so kind of childlike. So that's why it's between about 13 and let's say 13 and a half, although it's not dependent on age, it's dependent on these physical signs. Katan minilan de patur. And now the Gemara asks, how do you know that a kid who's just 11 or 12, a boy, is exempt and he's not ben sorer more? Min elan, we ask a question on that question. The Mishnah told you why, because he has not reached the age for which he is responsible for commandments. And furthermore, why are you asking? Even if the Mishnah did not give this reason, we know it ourselves. Where do we ever see throughout the Torah that a child is going to be punished? That here we would need a pasuk to say, oh, he's exempt. Of course he's exempt. We can figure it out ourselves. And anyway, the Mishnah said explicitly the reason. So why all of a sudden are you coming to ask, oh, what's the source? So we explain the question better. Anan hachika amrinan. Atu ben sorer more al chet'o neherag, al shem sofo neherag. Vechevan al shem sofo neherag, afilu katan nameh. Ve'od ben ve'lo ish katan mashma. So this is what we meant to ask. Ben sorer more, is he being killed for a sin that he did? It's true, he acted in a way that was not appropriate. Stealing is not allowed, and being gluttonous is not allowed. But these aren't serious prohibitions. They don't deserve capital punishment. Going against your parents, it's not deserving of capital punishment as concerning as it is. So he's not actually being killed for what he has done, but rather he's being killed because of what he will do. We predict that if this is his behavior now, it's likely he's going to do something in the future that will be deserving of capital punishment, and so we will kill him now because of what he will do in the future. So since this is an unusual law in that sense, we might have thought that even a child, even someone 10 years old who acts like this, it's not that he's liable, just like even when he's 13 or has two hairs, he's not liable because he didn't do anything that's so bad, but rather we're killing him based on the future. So I might think that even a 10-year-old you can kill based on what he did, what he's going to do in the future. And furthermore, here the law says, the pasuk says ben, and we learned in the Mishnah, child and not an adult. And if you tell me not an adult, then I assume in my mind that means a child, even if he's 8, 9, 10, 11, right? That would be included. And so that's why, since you said that, that's why I'm looking for a source to tell me that it's only when he has two hairs, 13 and a half, but not any younger. So actually the question makes a lot of sense. So what's the answer? Amar Rav Yehuda amar Rav damar kera v'chi yeh leish ben hasamuch ligburato shel ish. Since the pasuk says if a man has a child, now literally just means if someone who usually is an adult who has a child, we'll see. We're going to talk about in a second if a child has a child. Okay, but right now it's just giving a simple case of if a man has a child. But really the word leish is extra. Could have just said if there is a child, and once there's a child, you know the child has parents. So why does it add the word ish before ben? It's coming to juxtapose them. We aren't talking about a ben, someone who's a child, but it's a child that is near the strength of a man. So what kind of child is close to the strength of a man? Oh, well, that's a 13 or 13 and a half year old boy. Now the Mishnah taught that it goes from two hairs until the hair goes roundabout. Taneh Rabbi Chia ad she'akif atara. So roundabout what? Well, the first opinion, the Baraita Rabbi Chia says until it goes around the corona. Ki ata Rav Dimi amar hakafat gid velo hakafat besim. And when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, he explained, no, it only has to go around the member itself, but not around the betzim. So really that's a kind of shorter time than the growing so much. So it's just between two hairs and one circle around the main member. So that's a pretty short time when the ben sorer umoreh possibility of capital punishment would even apply. אמר רב חיסדא, קטן שהוליד, אין בנו נעשה בן סורר מורה. שנאמר כי יהיה לאיש בן ולא לבן בן. Rav Chisda says that if a minor has a child, a 12-year-old boy can sire a child. He is that child who's the son of a child himself. It's a child of a child because the father is also underage. That son cannot become a ben sorer moreh, even if he does all the bad things. Shen emad, as pasuk says, ki leish ben velo leben ben. It says if a man has a son, so only if he is an adult when he conceives the child, then the child can possibly be a ben sorer moreh. But it says only leish ben. But if he's a child when he conceives of the child, then even years later that child will never be able. The son will never be able to get capital punishment as a ben sorer moreh, even if he goes through all the motions. And now we ask, hold on, now you're learning two things from the same pasuk, leish ben. Now you're learning over here, Rav Chisda learns that ish ben has to be an adult who has a child, but we already need this pasuk to teach me what we learned previously from Rav, that ben sorer umoreh here only applies to someone who is near adulthood, right? The ish ben. So you can't use it for two things. Im ken lemakera ki yeh ben leish. Mai ki yeh leish ben shemamina lechad Rav Chisda. Oh, if you only wanted to teach the statement of Rav that he has to be near adulthood, around 13 and a half, then the pasuk could have said differently. If ben ki yeh ben leish, if there is a son to a man, and if there is a son to a man, then I would have known that has to be a son who's close to the age of a man. But the pasuk doesn't say that. It says ki leish ben. So since it says it in this order, so I can actually learn two things from it: that has to be an adult that has a child, and also that the child has to be almost an adult. So that's how we learn the statement of Rav Chisda. But now we ask, maybe the entire pasuk is only coming to teach Rav Chisda that the father has to be an adult in order for the son to be ben sorer moreh, and maybe we don't learn anything from this pasuk regarding the age of the child has to be after two hairs. Im ken nemakera ben ish mai leish ben shemamina tarte. No, if it was only teaching the statement of Rav Chisda, then it could have said ben ish. If there is a son to a man, and then I would know, okay, the father has to be a man. But why does it say leish ben? So from that extra letter, I can actually learn two things. And so that's how, even though it's only one phrase, we can learn two laws from it. Number one, the exact age of a child. That is, from the time he grows two hairs, and it extends a little bit after that. And the second law, that the father has to be an adult when he conceives of the son, in order for that son to possibly become a ben sorer umoreh. Baruch Adonai leolam, amen ve'amen.